Recently, someone sent me a video which was going viral for the past 2 months, I believe. It was about a group of people doing some sort of slow yoga movement with some sort of sword. I suppose it was like Chinese Jang sword, like flowing or twirling a sword to some kind of hype music, right? Which was, of course, marketed as sword yoga.
Okay, let's look at this.
Martial arts, yoga, and a sword, and you get a fitness craze that has gone viral online and is gaining traction. Jared Hill has more on a workout called
Wait.
Weapon Up, designed to do a lot more than just get you in shape.
In the battle for peace of mind.
Right?
And of course, the first time I watched it, I laughed so hard, not gonna lie. But then I thought, wait, there's something seriously misleading in all of these videos, in all of this movement, right? And that's why I should talk about this, because people like you're probably a beginner, should know, you deserve to know the difference between real swordsmanship and something which is marketed as fitness with a sword. If you still don't know me yet, hi, I'm Michael Kozint, and I have over 3 years of experience with longsword in historical European martial arts. Of course, through sparring and competing in international hema tournaments. I know what real swordsmanship looks like and how you're supposed to train it, because I'm doing it every week. And that's exactly why I want to talk about this. I also have a community called START SWORDFIGHTING, and the links are in the description or the first pinned comment. If you're a beginner or a newcomer who wants to start learning the actual swordsmanship skills from the beginning, then you should join this group. Alright, so let's get to the topic. Let's define the terms first. There is, of course, sword fighting, there's swordsmanship, and there's fencing. And those are just 3 words, basically 3 terms, meaning the same freaking thing, right? Which is about the skill of fighting with a sword against another real opponents with swords. This is just a target. If you have a name for him, let me know in the comments, alright? I thought about naming him Larry, but I don't know. So going back to the swordsmanship, sword fighting, and fencing, some of these terms are more popular to the general public, for example for you, than the others. So it's most commonly you understand what means sword fighting or fencing, right? But either way, all of these terms mean the same thing, right? Which is the actual skill of sword fighting. So how to use the sword or the longsword efficiently against another real opponent. And what is a sword yoga? I suppose it's a slow sword movement with some kind of tai chi or wushu movement integrated into this, often marketed as empowerment, wellness, or some kind of mindfulness practice, right? And it's frequently targeted for older practitioners and most commonly for just women in general. And what are actually sword flows? That's the tricky one, because sword flows have 2 completely different things sharing basically the same naming, so sword flows, right? So the first category is a legitimate hema solo drilling, actually learning the proper cut trajectory, learning the lines of a thrust, shadow fencing also, so using some sort of strikes and then coverage, so parry, afterwards to somewhat like imitate how would a real exchange go. Of course, sometimes with some sort of target like this one, sometimes without it, so just in the air and learning the proper movement patterns, right? Sometimes even on a tire, so with some kind of target, or even with some sort of opposition, so with a sword on a tripod before the actual target, right? Sword flows in HEMA, I call them solo drilling, and it's a generally like useful training. And the second category that shares the same naming as sword flows are aesthetic sword movement of twirling your sword around you to some sort of upbeat or hype music, while it also looks cool on a camera, right? Which is also marketed as some sort of skill development. So this is what I want to talk about today. Let's start with the first one. So what sword yoga actually is. The viral video at the beginning of this video that you saw me reacting to sparked all of this. The slow, peaceful movements with a sword, with some kind of tai chi or wushu movements integrated into this. Of course, rebranded as sword yoga. This kind of content you can often see on YouTube, but most commonly on Instagram. So some of these creators that are basically sharing such content, I'll give this to them that they created a genuinely impressive business out of this. So getting money from the people for learning all of these flashy movements, right? But here's what it actually is. Those are just Tai Chi or Wushu influenced movement targeted at older practitioners or at complete newcomers to any kind of physical training, like whatsoever, right? And I want to be entirely clear with you. There is nothing wrong with real Tai Chi or real Wushu movement, because real Wushu training is athletically demanding, technically serious, and genuinely impressive thing to do. If you love the aesthetic of sword flows and such other things, I highly encourage you to actually search for the actual Wushu club in your vicinity to actually train this sort of stuff. That's a legitimate and impressive practice, believe me. Of course, what I want to upload into your mind from my understanding, right, is that the problem isn't the movement. Like, the problem lies in what it's being sold as. Sword yoga is not swordsmanship training. Duh, Mr. Obvious, you could say, but it's not as obvious as it should be, right? It does not prepare you for sparring, for real pressure, for correct movement patterns. For example, moving your sword first and then following up with the feet and not the other way around, right? That's one of the most common mistakes or sequences that beginners tend to do. It's a common mistake. Also, in sword fighting, you should understand distance management. You should understand timing. You should understand also tempo. That's something what sword fighting actually requires of you. So calling sword yoga as sword training is completely misleading. And all of the people or the general public who are buying the courses from these content creators on sword yoga movement deserve to know that difference, right? The next point is what aesthetic sword flows actually are. Then there is, of course, the second category of sword flows, which you can often see other content creators, mainly on Instagram, but sometimes on YouTube as well, doing cool twirling motions like this to some kind of upbeat music, right? Looking like a real sword master to an audience who doesn't understand anything about real swordsmanship. And look, I'll be honest, twirling a sword is very cool. I've done it countless of times, and I like doing it myself, right? It looks really cool, such as this one, right? But, but it doesn't teach you anything about the actual swordsmanship skill. It's a good way of aura farm in front of a camera and clip farm also, right, on Instagram. Of course, it's not sword training. Specifically, it's not swordsmanship training. It doesn't teach you the fundamentals or the principles of sword fighting. It's not building any of the skills that you need to actually fence or spar against real opponents. Of course, the problem comes when it's presented as something more than just that, than just sword twirls.
Designed to do a lot more than just get you in shape.
When creators of these videos softly imply or sometimes even directly claim that these flows are developing real swordsmanship skills, right? So that's where the misleading part actually starts. And I should also mention some of these videos that are AI generated content. In this space, it's far, far worse. It's a mass-produced sword movement videos that you can most commonly see on YouTube ads. And what I mean are the Tai Chi walking or some other bullshit that has Tai Chi inside of it, right? Or military calisthenics, right? It's like, it's so bullshit, right? I hope you know that's not real fitness thing, right? The real Tai Chi has some sort of sword movement that you can call sword yoga or sword flows, but it's targeted for people who have no reference point on what the real thing looks like. So all of those videos are not teaching you swordsmanship. Of course, they're farming engagement out of you and selling courses that deliver nothing of real martial value. Johannes Lichtenauer said it best. This art belongs to princes and lords, to knights and men-at-arms. For this just and honorable art does not seek quarrels, nor does it teach broad, showy cuts with which the common people amuse themselves. True fighting takes the straightest and shortest way to its goals, so that in time of need it may bring salvation to the just. So this was a combined English translation of passages from the Lichtenauer longsword tradition. And somehow these passages are perfectly relevant to Instagram in 2026. So broad, showy cuts with which the common people amuse themselves. That's of course sword flows. That's what I mean. This is sword yoga as well. And these passages were written 600 years ago by one of the most important masters in the longsword tradition. So if you really think about it, the distinction between what looks impressive and what actually works in real sword fighting scenario or an exchange is completely not a new conversation. It was a conversation from the beginning of this martial art. What real hema solo drilling actually looks like. So of course, this is where I want to make a clear distinction for you. There is a legitimate version of sword flows in hema. It's of course called solo drilling. So just like I said, learning the proper trajectory of your cuts, keeping yourself steady on your fencing stance, and of course balanced, having your knees bent for proper structure, right? Keeping your chest upwards and not pushing your shoulders up when you're cutting forward, right? Those are just simple examples. Also, understanding the line of the cut, understanding the line of a thrust, understanding the center line towards your opponent or an imaginary one, knowing that you should hit his target, so his head, his hands, or his legs, instead of the opposition, so instead of his sword. You don't always need to displace his sword first to then hit him directly. No, you can go with something directly into him while covering yourself with your blade and your crossguard if you are good enough. So what I want to tell you is those are real movement patterns that you are training your muscle memory with, right? Because as I always say, beginners in sword fight, so in historical European martial arts or in any other convention of sword fighting in general, need to understand that their muscle memory is way important than what they think, because beginners don't have time to think in sword fighting. They only have time to properly react with their muscle memory if they're learning the fundamental movements the right way. So the difference between real solo drilling and aesthetic sword flows, just like these ones, is completely simple. Legitimate drilling is always in service of something greater than just the movement that you're doing. Every movement is building a specific skill that transfers directly to your sparring performance, which tangibly means how many times you win versus how many times you lose against other people. And aesthetic flows aren't in service of anything except looking good on camera, right? And I can do this myself. I can clip farm, I can aura farm on a video looking good with a sword, doing these showy cuts. And okay, there's nothing wrong with that. As long as you, the one who's watching this video, yes, I'm talking to you, as long as you're completely aware, completely honest about what it actually is. There is also the empowerment argument I want to talk about. So what real empowerment actually looks like. A lot of sword yoga and a lot of aesthetic sword flows content is marketed specifically toward women as empowerment movement, as empowerment through using a sword for their fitness journey or something like that. Through, of course, using phrases such as releasing your inner strength, connecting with your female warrior energy, that kind of framing, right? And I genuinely respect the impulse behind that thing. Women absolutely should pick up swords, any sword that they want, right? And of course, women absolutely belong in swordsmanship training. Even in my HEMA club, I have a lot of female acquaintances and friends who are actually training the real swordsmanship skills and actually fighting against other people, even against men sometimes. They're training, they're sparring, and they even attend international HEMA tournaments to also test themselves. That's the real empowerment. But here's what I'd say. Sword yoga and aesthetic sword flows are just halfway through to real empowerment. The full version of it is historical European martial arts, so HEMA, or any other sword fighting convention that you're more interested in. Could be Buchurt, so like medieval MMA, or could be even, I don't know, Olympic fencing if you're more into that. Speaking from my experience, HEMA is one of the hardest sports anyone can take up, including men or women. It demands your real athleticism, it demands your real technique, your understanding. It demands you to know how to move efficiently, even under the actual pressure of an exchange. And it also needs your real courage to step into sparring and face real opponents. That is real empowerment, not twirling your sword to a camera and to some kind of hype music in a studio with good lighting and good color grading behind it. If you want the aesthetic part of it, then I highly encourage you to find a real wushu school. Because these movements, so wushu, is athletically demanding, technically serious, and genuinely impressive thing to train. If you want to actually learn how to sword fight with a sword against other people, then find a hema club in your vicinity, or a buhurt club, or an Olympic fencing club if you're more into that. Because yes, that's where the real empowerment actually lives. So the simple distinction that I want to take away from this entire video is that sword yoga and aesthetic sword flows are not swordsmanship training. It's just a truth. Don't shoot the messenger, basically. Don't shoot me, because I'll bonk you with my sword. They're just movement practices and content formats, and that's completely fine, as long as you know for what they actually are. You have to call them for what they are, basically. Real hema solo drilling is a legitimate way of learning swordsmanship the right way. Of course, solo drilling is in service of actually testing your might against other people with a sword. And of course, with hema kits, right? So with protective gear on you, right? We don't just bonk each other with just steel swords. That would be stupid. We don't want to kill our sparring opponents, right? But also, real wushu and real tai chi sword training is a legitimate athletic and artistic practice with its own serious tradition behind it. So it was never about the activity in of itself. The problem lies in the label. So it's misleading people about what they're actually buying, so like courses, or what they're learning is what I take issue with. Swordsmanship training is a real thing. It's been a real thing for centuries on end. Of course, nowadays we don't have to kill our enemies with sharp swords to understand and train and learn how to actually sword fight efficiently, right? we live in the modern age. We don't need to kill another human being to learn some sort of technique, right? We can do it safely with specific tools, such as this sword, which bends on thrust impact, for example. Let me show you. And of course, with protective gear on us. And it's available to everyone today. But you just have to know how to do it or how to start it properly, including you. I'm talking to you, right? HEMA is available to you. I really don't want you to settle for a thing halfway through to what swords were really meant to do. Of course, in reality, in medieval times, swords were meant to murder our opponents. But today we don't have to murder, right? And we don't want to even hurt our sparring opponents. We are just using the sword-shaped training tool for learning the martial skill. So actually training the swordsmanship thing. So broad showy cuts with which common people amuse themselves with. It was said by Lichtenauer in 15th century. And today I'm just agreeing with him in 2026. And so if this video made you to want to find out what the actual thing looks like, how to actually begin training swordsmanship, so sword fighting in HEMA convention from the very beginning, if you're a newcomer or a beginner into this martial art. And you don't even need to buy a steel sword and the full HEMA gear that you see on me to start training. No, there are way cheaper and better alternatives for someone who is just starting out. Just like I started out 3 years ago. Not with this, not with these kind of things. With a simple fencing mask, so with this gear, and with a padded sword. So you have to check out my community called START SWORDFIGHTING, where I go more in depth and more structurally on how to actually begin and keep going with your training, so like the swordsmanship skill, the right way. And the community has over 300 members inside of it, with motivated beginners, but also advanced guys who joined to help me out on this endeavor of teaching all of the beginners on how to actually learn sword fighting the right way. And if you want to support this channel, then join my membership group called the Vanguard. Thank you guys for supporting this video. And one free thing that you could do for boosting this channel for free because you're already watching this video, right? Give me a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, write a comment on what you think about sword yoga and sword flows, and if I'm way too unconventional or too controversial, let me know in the comments. All the links are below, so appease the algorithm of YouTube by doing all of these things, alright? Yeah. And remember, always take initiative.